Hey everyone, we are back again with our vlog, basically discussions about Harmony Farm Sanctuary. And so myself, Kelly Sheets, Tracy again from the first one we did, and we have Robine Bots, the founder of the farm. So today we just thought we would talk about, our intent with these videos is just to discuss the farm, talk about, make it real for anyone listening, the reality of farm sanctuaries, the reality of the life of farmed animals and what happens when they come to live with us, and maybe sometimes what happens when they don't. But today we just thought Robine could start out by sharing the story of like why she started the farm sanctuary, how that all came together. And then secondary, we'll just follow up with any conversation that comes out of that and see where the conversation goes. So Robine, fire away, which would be great for us to hear because I feel like I haven't heard this story a ton. I've been part of the story, but it'd be nice to hear what you say.
All right. Well, I guess I should kind of go back to when I was 12 years old. I won't take us too long down that path, but when I was 12 years old, I was an avid horseback rider and I was at a horse camp, and they sent home these permission slips for all the kids to watch farm life in action, for all the participants. And they were going to kill a pig named Cindy, who's the same breed of pig as Eleanor Pigby. And my mom did not sign that permission slip that day because she knew I was a sensitive little kid. And so I didn't have permission to watch it. And leading up to that time where they were going to do the farm life in action, all the kids lined up their chairs and sat on the chairs and had their lunch. And I was watching them do this I remember just being a little weirded out by the whole thing, to say the least. And I ended up hearing it and hid behind a tree and watched it. And it was pretty traumatizing. It was like nothing short of traumatizing for me. And I know that's a really bummer story, but I never knew that would play into a life-altering thing for me. I never ate pig again since I was 12 years old. And then very quickly after that, I realized a pig is a cow, is a chicken. And so I became a vegetarian from the age of 12. And then I didn't become vegan until I was in my 20s when I read a book called A Diet for a New America. And
I didn't know you were a vegetarian when you were 12. Yeah. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So, I ate I did some dabbling here and there with some fish and stuff for a while, but I became vegan in my early 20s. And once I realized that the dairy industry was pretty awful too. Never did I think I would start a sanctuary. Never, ever, ever in a million years. My daughter, fast forward many years, I have two kids, and my daughter, when she was 8, begged and begged and begged for a micro pig, a teacup pig. And she wrote speeches and persuasive essays, and my dad ended up buying her a pig from a breeder. And now it's everything we speak out against is supporting that industry. And we had this pig named Pig Floyd in our house for about 2 years. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? What have I allowed in my house? He's so smart. He's a rude house guest because he's so and I had this buyer's remorse, but I'm stubborn and I'm not gonna relinquish an animal once I get one. And so I started doing research and felt more like an asshole for getting from a breeder because 98% of people that get micro pigs, which don't actually exist, end up rehoming them within the first 2 years. And so I had this idea one day. I was like, I'm not getting rid of this pig. I'm going to start a rescue. And it was kind of like that. And so I did.
I love it. It's
And
so
that was,
funny because we think like these big decisions, like this is a life altering decision that you've made, right? Like
yeah,
this is like things we're supposed to think through, but it seems that the big decisions just happen. Oh, let's go there. Oh, let's have a kid. Let's start a sanctuary. Let's buy this house. Like sometimes those things have lead ups, but often the thing happens like in a second, it's like, okay, here we go. We have a sanctuary with 150 animals.
yeah, it was kind of crazy. And most of my like life choices have been kind of like that, like
Me
the
too.
life altering ones. It's like I knew. I know that sounds kind of weird, but
Yeah, not weird at all. You were
I
meant to
don't
do
think
it.
to us. Yeah.
Yeah, know your audience. We don't think it's weird at all.
Yeah, I love that you said well, first of all, I didn't remember that about the pig, Cindy the pig. And that actually was one of my experiences at the time. I'd been living in Bali, and first of all, my ex had said to me, like, I don't know, I grew up in middle America eating whatever my mom gave us, which wasn't terrible, not great, lots of processed foods. But I remember him saying, that's disgusting. I have now been around pigs. I know what they're being fed. He wasn't thinking from an animal welfare perspective. He was thinking how gross it was. He was like, this is disgusting. People don't know what they're eating. And I remember like, that was my first awakening. And we lived in a house with locals, and they would keep pigs in the little back, like 2 cement walls, like with the half cement in the front. They'd throw them stuff. And it was like, there was so much unconsciousness. And I was there when more than one was slaughtered. And I'd never, ever eat it after that. That was just, if anyone's participated in the slaughter of a pig, I think you either have to completely turn off your humanity because there's nothing humanitarian about killing a pig. It's a horrifying sounding event, and even if you don't even know anything about pigs, you have to either shut off your heart so that you can keep doing that, and then that alters your humanity as it is, or you just don't. You're like, no, I'm done. It's a wild thing. You're like, because some animals don't make much noise. Pigs, they make a lot of noise and they scream like a human. It's terrible. And so that might be a sad story, but it's a reality, right? It's like that's real. And until I knew that, I didn't know it. And then I knew it, and now I'm different, like when we know, maybe we make different choices.
Mhm.
So yeah.
yeah. Um, yeah, I have to say that sound that you mentioned is traumatizing. It
Oh
was
yes.
literally traumatizing for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you
Uh,
been have you had that experience, Tracy?
No,
Okay,
never.
may you never have the experience
I
of that.
know.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm missing out right
Yeah,
now.
it
I
sears
watched
in
enough
your
other
mind. Yeah.
documentaries where like, indirectly I've experienced it, and that was more than enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's also interesting. So we were talking about like our experiences. Like I think that's actually a good intro into, growing up. And so many of us either have grown up on farms, people that grow up on farms, they raise animals in a certain way, or we have no exposure at all to farmed animals. And so I've noticed that the people that I know that grew up on farms, they normalized things that most humans will not like that feels horrifying, like something that someone would do. You would never ever do that to your dog or to another animal that you loved and cared for, but there's an acceptance of this to animals and farms. Or like me, you never ever met a farmed animal until Robine was your friend and had all these animals, and then I said I would help. So all of a sudden I have all this exposure to these extraordinary beings, and that exposure I think has changed my life, and I think most of the volunteers lives. It's really life altering once you get to spend that much time with animals that look and smell and sound and eat differently than us. They move differently, and yet there's something so us, like we are not separate, right? That's
Mhm.
been the great thing I've learned from being around them. Is I'm like, oh, my delusions of separateness, this illusion that I'm not an animal and I'm not like them, somehow I could separate myself. It's like it's completely gone, you know.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
along with like the the way that we can feel like we're on the top of a pyramid and all the animals and nature and all that is underneath us. I mean, I know me just spending time at the sanctuary, it's like, it just like one big level playing field, but we're all helping each other out and we're all coexisting in this beautiful way. You know, like I see this depicted sometimes where it's a human on top of the pyramid and they call it an ecosystem. And then you see them all like kind of blended in a circle and it's called an ecosystem, you know? So it feels more like that, you know? And half the time it feels like they're in charge of me out there. Like, no, I want this. Like, get out of my way. You know, it's like, okay, you don't want this. You don't have to have it.
Yeah, I agree.
And they know their names, like each resident, you can see they flick their ear, they run to you, you know,
Yeah.
or like Hank blatantly ignores you, you know, like we're so similar.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. How do you think having the daily exposure to the animals has changed your life, Robine?
Oh, wow. You know, I feel like I've learned more from the residents than anything else. I learned from them every single day. You know, we, like you were saying, Tracy, we're not separate from them. We are part of nature. We're animals. And the more that we are separate from them or we try to be separate, I feel like the more we suffer as humans. They spend their lives outside, living each day, living in the moment, being mindful. You know, there's so much to learn from them. I feel like that's what I've learned. And obviously they're sentient and they have a million different ways of showing their feelings.
Yeah. I think I would say it's probably the same for me too, is like being around them it's like constant dynamite that blows up beliefs that I had implanted from when I was young. It's like a constant awareness, and still all these years later, I could notice sometimes a thought or a judgment or a perception or a belief comes across my mind about something, and then I have to check myself too, because I realize, no, that's just old programming. Someone told me that, teachers told me that, neighbors told, whatever, people told me that, and then now I have a felt experience of something different. Like, I remember the first time I saw that, like, eating animals is weird t-shirt. And I was like, really, is it that weird? Like, it didn't really strike me as it struck me as a judgment when I first saw it. But now my perception is it is weird because they're my friends. Like, and they have so many emotions. And the thought that I would prioritize my pleasure over their existence is like so egoic, like you said, Tracy. I'm like, I can't even, it is blown up like all these perceptions I have. And even, I mean, Robine, you know this, sometimes I'll say something and it's like old words come from the history of my mouth, like from history out of my mouth, something that is no longer relevant, but it's a habit of how we speak or how we say something. And then I'm like, I don't even believe that anymore. It just came out because it was programmed. So I have more compassion perhaps for others now because I recognize we are deeply programmed to disregard all other beings as less than us. Like, it's fascinating.
Yeah. And those
Yeah.
are things we learn so young. Like those are things like things our parents say as we're really young. It's like, oh, drink milk for strong bones, even though it does
Right.
the opposite, you know,
Right.
but you don't know. Or like because we see a carton with like a smiling cow, which is ridiculous. It's like, oh, well, I'm only eating happy cows or whatever, you know, and like the
Yeah.
marketing of big ag, like they want you to be like, oh, these are only happy cows or happy fish and all this, which is like completely
Yeah.
ridiculous and false. But we
Yeah.
don't know until we start to
Yeah.
question.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking of like, for me, the cultural programming. You know, my parents were immigrants, they're Dutch. I grew up like cheese is like literally part of life in the Netherlands. And I never ever thought I could give up cheese. You know, I felt like it would be such a loss. And I remember going through Costco several years ago and they have Dutch cheese at Costco. And I remember having like a visceral reaction of like, I had given it up and I was like, ah, you know, it felt like, um, you know, and just, I told myself for years, like, oh, it's just cultural. Like we eat cheese, you know? And now years later, I don't miss it, but it was hard for a long time.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. And still when I go to the Netherlands, I get that little ping of like that old stuff of like, oh yeah, that's what I eat. And I'm like, no, no, I don't.
Mhm.
This is a side note, but I remember growing up, I told you, we ate all kinds of food. SpaghettiOs were like my favoriteest food when I was young. But of course, we couldn't have SpaghettiOs all the time. So I wanted SpaghettiOs. And I remember that's who I love SpaghettiOs, right? So years later, I went and got a can of SpaghettiOs because I was free as an adult. I'm like, I'm gonna get some SpaghettiOs. And I was like so grossed out. I opened it and was like, this is disgusting. And so it reminds me of how like we create these stories of like memories of past comforts or something that are not actually current. Like now the thought of eating cheese, like I think it would be very like I eat vegan cheese on occasion, and I find that one of the things, actually, this is a good note, is that in reality, like these cheeses are delicious, but they like the thought that they're actually replacing dairy cheese, like sometimes they just can't do it. But we eat it because we're making a choice, and we just say, okay, well, this is what I'm replacing with. I'm not going to actually eat a vegan cheese that replaces it. They're just not the same, but they're similar enough that I can have what I'm looking for. But that place where we get so attached to like these comforty,
Mhm.
like, oh, I want cheese. If I ate cheese now, I probably wouldn't go to the bathroom for 5 days, or I would be in the bathroom for 5 days, like one or the other. Like my system has now acclimated to eating light food, not heavy, dense foods like meats or dairies, and it would rebel. But it is like looking at our cultural stories, I think, is important because one of the things I've been thinking about, like as we have these conversations with the farm so often, I think about how much fear comes into play when people don't want to change their habits. We have people at the farm who come and love the animals and love us and still eat them when they
Yeah.
when they leave the farm. And so I think about that compassionately and try to understand. And I think we are highly attached to these belief systems about us and how we fit into our tribes. Like that, well, if
Mhm.
I change something as significant as that, who will I be? What's my identity? And
Yeah.
so it's like this kind of question is bigger than just stop eating it. It's like, I think it's like a big deal when you decide to go vegan. It's you're really making a kind of courageous, risky decision because people do have an opinion about that. And you really start people's fear and resistance when you choose to say, no, the animals are more important to me than the pleasure of me eating cheese.
Mhm.
I think it's a really interesting part of the conversation. So,
Yeah, I think there's some interesting dynamics there. Like I think about making we'll just talk about like the dietary change aspect of veganism, but like there's some real interesting family dynamics that exist in the world where it could be anything someone would decide to do different, and all of a sudden they're like made to feel ostracized. So then
right.
something as central as food. So say like you're going to like a traditional American Thanksgiving where typically there's a big old brown carcass right in the middle of the table. And now like
Right.
this person's experiencing it differently and doesn't want to be a part of it. Like
Right.
it's so important to know why you're doing it. And there are so many different reasons to do it. We tend to talk mostly, I think, about the for the animals aspect, but there's a whole bunch of reasons that coalesce together. But some people's families can get real snarly about these things, and it's not even
Yeah.
about them, which I find so hilarious. Like none of it is
Right.
about these other people, and it's just a personal decision, but people in your orbit can make it about them even though it's
Yeah.
nothing to do with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
I think so.
Mhm.
Um, Robine, you also have people come. I was thinking back to like the origin story of Robine. Now you have, as a counselor, you bring your clients onto the farm. How has that like? How do you think that's affected the people who are coming, like, or your work? Or I see, I love this. Now I have your attention. I don't get to ask you this stuff all the time.
Well, as a mental health therapist, I keep my political views to myself. I keep a lot of my personal opinions and my lifestyle to myself. However, my clients come to the farm you know, and a lot of them, although I'm not saying it, they ask questions, you know, it lends itself to a lot of questions, like, what do you do with the eggs? And, you know, what do you do with the wool? And what do you do with these pigs? And so I'm pretty honest in what I say without putting any of my opinion on it. And I've had some clients that have chosen to go vegan on their own. I've had some parents mad at me because their kids wanted to stop eating meat, which is always a little like scary ground for me, because, you know, I wouldn't want to, like, my job is not to influence people, it's to help them work within their own framework. But really what I think people get a sense of is that we're not so different from the animals when they're here, whether they're my clients or they're people on a tour or other guests. They get a sense of like the compassion at this place. And I always hear people, especially people who grew up with a lot of animals, they're like, the animals here are different. You know, like they want to interact with us. They know their names. They respond to their names. They're not fearful of us. And so I feel like that's pretty obvious and apparent for anybody that comes to the farm.
Yeah. I really love doing tours because it's the opportunity, people get to ask questions. And usually as the tour goes on, they start asking questions. Like I've had people ask me, but wouldn't pigs like eat people when we go see the big pig area? Don't pigs eat people too? So then I go through like, yeah, they could eat people, like people could eat people too. Like they could eat people. And yes, there are stories of people murdering someone and then feeding them to pigs or whatever. There are these stories. I said, but you know, and I walk them through like their lives here, they get good food, they get lots of love. These animals are going to be like their whole mental emotional state is different. These are our friends, these are, you know, our family here. Their feeling of what the behavior, like the behavioral outcomes, are going to be different than pigs that are on a farm that are fed shitty food and are in survival mode. Like that's a completely different environment. So all beings are capable of many, many things. And it's so fun, I think, to be able to have them ask sometimes the most foolish questions that those of us who are never around animals, farmed animals, have asked. It's like to be asked, why don't you milk Norman? And, you know, we've talked about this. Why don't you milk Norman and Kingston? Well, first we start with, you know, they're males for one, you know, and then it starts the whole dairy conversation. And I think it's a really lovely opportunity because I realize, you know, I'm educated and I'm an intelligent person, and I wasn't, you know, raised in a cave, and I still knew so little about how we treated animals that we were using for food sources and products. And I love that at the farm people get to meet them and be like, oh duh, I didn't really think of that. Or like they start to like be able to laugh at the ridiculous things that we were taught, or the, I don't know, the misinformation that is just repeated, you know, especially for kids. Like people don't want to make them uncomfortable, so they tell them a bunch of lies about animals, and then there's never a change, so they never actually learned the truth. They just learn the foolish stories from when they were young. So it's a great opportunity to just expose them to our friends there, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Those tours are so impactful. And I'll share like my favorite moment I've ever had on a tour was with a guy who was a retired rancher. And so what I love about giving tours is that I really pay attention to like the feel of the group, and I ask each person why they're there. So then I kind of know my audience. Like, okay, can I go real into animal ag, or do I just stick with personality and sprinkle in some tidbits? And there was this rancher, but I just had a feeling. I'm like, I think this is going to go well for this guy. So we were in the beginning, we had talked about like the cows and the goats that are in the front section there. And then I take them over to the chickens. And I told the group my favorite chicken story, which is the experience where I started to really see them as sentient individual beings. And so what that story was is I used to volunteer twice a week for feed shifts. And I would go into the barn first, And I didn't even realize that one of the chickens, Shirley, would run up to me. I mean, she would haul ass from across the courtyard when I would start talking, and she would circle my feet and greet me. But she did it time and time again, and I never noticed because I was always looking at the board and looking at this, and here's this turkey, and here's that, until I realized that she'd been doing it every time. So then every time after that, I'd go in, I'd start to talk, and I would look to see where she was, and she would run over to my feet. So I tell the group the story, and I'm watching this guy, and then sharing some other facts about chickens, like they can recognize up to 100 different faces, and they can play musical instruments, and they have best friends and all this. And I'm saying all this, and I'm watching him, and he kneels down, and he's getting eye level with these chickens. And he's real quiet, and I'm done talking. I'm just watching this guy, and he turns to me, he goes, "I don't think I can ever eat another chicken wing." And I was like, yes. It was the best. And he asked the best questions. He wasn't the retired rancher trying to defend his past career. He was there learning, and it was the best. And I've given a lot of really fun tours, but that was by far my favorite, and my favorite moment, especially with an older man who, I hate to say, I would just assume is all set in his ways and thinks he knows everything. He wasn't that guy.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Shirley.
I have a story that was, I mean, as you're talking, you guys, I'm like thinking of hundreds of stories like these, right? Like how kids come in, they're like, "Oh, I heard turkeys are stupid." And, that seems to be such a common misconception that, we have to otherize them, make them feel, or make them dumb in our mind so we can ignore what we're doing to them. And Lurch was in a tour one time, and I'm like talking about him, and we're feeding him peanuts because he loves peanuts, and he jumps up and literally jumps off the ground to get the peanuts. And I was all done with peanuts, and he looks at me. You know how he turns his head and up at you, direct eye contact at me, and then he walks me over to the peanut container. He wanted more, and I was like. And the people in the tour were like, "Oh my gosh, it's like my dog. He's like my dog begging," and it was so cool because Lurch was doing exactly what we all know they're capable of. And it's lovely when people see it too.
Mm-hmm.
I think I texted you, Robine, that, so Tracy, I don't know if you've been in on the conversation yet, but Lurch, for those of you listening, Lurch is 9 years old, and he has had a very recent decline. He's not doing well. Probably old age. We've now tested him for the things we could, and we think it's just old age. He's declining. But I was just getting weepy because I thought he has been the greatest ambassador for turkeys. Mm-hmm. People come in there all the time. I mean, it makes me teary. I get choked up. People walk in the barn that have never been around farmed animals, and they're starting to get weirded out by the turkeys because they're all fluffing up, and they're coming over, they're doing their little entry, and then to see how they follow us and they watch and they're looking up, like you said, Robine, and people become enamored with them. They become really connected to them. And when you ask, well, sometimes I'll say, who did you most enjoy meeting today? And a lot people say the turkeys, which I have no idea if that's connecting them to saying, I'm not going to eat turkey anymore. I don't know if there's enough of that, but at least it's something's got to shift in that moment because their perception has opened, and I just hope that means that they'll consider that Sirius and Lurch are not unique. They are unique because we love them, but they're not unique as turkeys. This is what turkeys are like. And I do think it's important to remember the capabilities of so many of these humans when we are abused and disregarded and fed crappy food and kept in a pen, in prison. How do we perform? We can look at that. We see what happens to humans when that happens. Well, that happens to animals, right? All animals. We are animals. We humans are animals. So it's being in a place like this or the other farm sanctuaries in the nation where animals are respected and they have good food and they have space to wander and be creative and get to know other animals. It's you really start to see their dynamic, sentient amazingness because they're safe. They're not in survival. And it's really, Robine, that's probably the coolest thing I think that, you doing this has created this, and now like Tracy and I and so many people get to see it because we never would have, like, when would I have seen that? When would I have realized how amazing? They're not just cool, like, oh, they're cool like dogs. No, they're really, these animals are amazing, and they have so much more to offer than I think most of us humans realize, you know. And it's just because we don't get exposed. So we need to expose people more.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 12:48. I'm kind of curious, like, this is going to really put you on the spot. We started with the origin story. Is there anywhere you see going in the next, it's 10 years, our 10-year anniversary, for your own personal, like, what would I like to see happen as far as these friends here? What is your vision for the next many years?
Ooh, that is putting me on the spot.
It is,
but
well, the sky's open. You can talk about education. You can talk about how you want them to influence. You can talk about anything. I'm just kind of curious.
I think, you know, well, what I'm noticing right now with our aging population of residents is that, as you all know, we've lost quite a few of our friends. And it's incredibly sad. And it's also a measure of how much we love them as individual beings. And so I think it's kind of, you know, like the vision is just naturally evolving. Even though, like, I'm, you know, I don't want it to, you know, in a lot of ways, I don't want to lose my friends. It makes me super sad. You know, they're all individuals. And so some of the evolvement, or I don't know if that's a word, some of
Evolution.
some of the evolution, thank you, it's naturally occurring. And it's just watching, you know, like our volunteers' hearts connecting with the individuals as we're seeing them through the course of their lives. It's also, you know, in addition to being sad, it's beautiful. And I think it helps people connect more to their lives, you know, their individual lives. So I hope just, you know, even though I don't want to lose anymore, I hope that people see more of that and continue to open their hearts. And I also hope that we continue to share our message with loving kindness, without judgment, so people do feel comfortable asking those questions, you know, that to us might seem silly now. But I think that's how we learn and we grow and we help spread the word. You know, and I hope more people, as the climate changes more and more people jump on board. Because we can make a really positive impact, you know, on the lives of individual residents and the health of our planet. So I want to see more of that.
I like it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm really glad it's such, what's that?
I said I made up a new word, apparently.
Involvement. We'll take it.
Yeah.
I actually think that's a really lovely thing about the aging, you know, that it's evolving as they age, and are like, the people that know them are really more deeply connecting. They're having a whole nother phase of a relationship with them. That's interesting.
Yeah.
For sure. Lovely.
Yeah, I mean, I can just say just a little bit about like how sad and how awesome that was to have that relationship with Bob at the end of his life, because it was my very first volunteer shift. I was like, something about this goat. I think this is my boy here. And he was just the closest relationship I've had there was with him. So to be able to be so a part of his care team at the end, and Robine, I was just so impressed that like you wanted other people to be in there as decision makers too, like to have different voices there, that it wasn't just you deciding, you know, like to share in that responsibility. And that's such a big responsibility. And Bob had a great life, and it was so sad to see his decline. And it was so beautiful how we always kept him prioritized first. It wasn't about our sadness of his inevitable passing, but like that we how does he feel? Does he seem to have any vitality? Like, is he able to walk around without stumbling? Like, look in his eyes. Like, what does it feel like he wants? And it was sad and so beautiful. And I'm so glad that he got to experience his senior days and the end of his life being so obviously cared for. I mean, he had all like the apples and the jackets and the blankets and the visitors and all that he ever could have wanted. You know, I mean, he was a king till the last moment, and it was sad and it was beautiful. And I wouldn't have wanted him to go out any other way. So
Yeah.
I'm thankful for the way that you do that, and like seeing the end of that physical relationship and to be able to be a part of it with my little goat boyfriend was really, really lovely. I think about it often.
Actually, that's another reflection on what's been really cool about the farm is that, again, Robine, that is one of the ways that you've been instrumental in that, because you hold that tone. Is so many people do think of even their own pets as a pet, as a separation, so that when it's inconvenient or it doesn't quite fit in the exact budget, then they will euthanize this pet, right? There's not like and not that you should hold on. It's like there's this beautiful balance of like, how do you love these beings as if they're worthy and they deserve, just like us animals deserve care and love as best we can. They deserve it. And to be able to walk that journey and working that out, like, it's not about us, okay? It's about them. And then when is the stop point? When do you let go? Well, can we do this? Is there a little more we can do because we can? No, it's not logical, but we can. You know, it's like such a fascinating journey to be on with them. So yeah, I think you're right about something about this next phase. It's going to be a lovely and challenging time. So yeah. Well, why don't we wrap up here, and then Robine, we hope that you can come on more of our vlogs because it's nice having you on here.
Fun.
Good. We're gonna hold you to that.
I will be
Right.
held to that, and I'll
Good.
pick up new words.
Nice. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. And you know, you heard us talking about tours. So if you want to come on a tour, we would be more than happy to show you around. And you could go to the website, harmonyfarmsanctuary.com, and all the links will be below this if you're interested to follow along with all of our almost 150 friends there. So have a great day.